Clara arrived in London with only 2 suitcases and a heart full of hope. She had left Brazil with one goal: to build a new life away from the endless struggles and disappointments that had shadowed her family for years. But standing in the middle of the bustling city, she felt like a tiny fish in a vast ocean. People rushed by without a glance, and everything moved at lightning speed. Her English was good, but every conversation felt like a riddle, especially with the thick accents around her. Finding a job was her first challenge. With no contacts and only a small amount of savings, Clara took on shifts at a small coffee shop. She worked long hours, smiling at customers, asking if they wanted extra milk or room for sugar, but deep down, she felt isolated. Her co-workers were polite, but no one spoke to her beyond work-related tasks, until she met Sophie. Sophie was a tall, friendly woman with a quick laugh, and she immediately noticed Clara's struggle to adjust. After a few casual chats, Sophie began inviting Clara to lunch, sharing her own experiences and helping Clara feel less alone. It was during one of these lunches that Clara opened up about her father, a quiet man who had passed away years ago. Clara spoke about the odd contradictions in his stories about his time in the UK, tales she'd barely questioned back then but now seemed puzzling. Sophie listened intently and, with a curious look, said, "Why not try to learn more about him? Maybe there's something here that could help you understand his story." Before we dive deep, let us know where in Brazil you're watching from, and if you could live anywhere in the world, where would it be and why? We'd love to hear your dreams. That simple suggestion sparked something in Clara. Could there really be more to her father's past? The thought intrigued her, and soon enough she was wandering through old neighborhoods her father had once mentioned. She found herself searching for clues, anything that could explain the mysterious life her father had lived abroad. On one of her days off, Clara visited a small corner shop he used to frequent, a place he had told her about in passing. The shop owner, a graying man with thick glasses, squinted at her curiously as she explained her connection to the man who had visited all those years ago. "Oh, that name sounds familiar, but we knew him as Gabriel," he said, a hint of surprise on his face. Clara's heart skipped a beat. Gabriel. She only knew her father by the name he used in Brazil. Why would he have another name here? Her mind raced with questions as she thanked the shop owner and left. What was her father hiding? And why had he never told her about it? That evening, Clara met Sophie again, her head spinning with the new discovery. Sophie was equally shocked but encouraged her to continue searching. Together, they spent hours discussing all the possibilities. Could her father have been involved in something secret? Something he couldn't tell his family about? The mystery had just begun, and Clara was determined to uncover the truth, even if it meant finding out things she'd never imagined. Clara's mind buzzed with unanswered questions, each one more confusing than the last. Her father had always been a private man, someone who preferred to sit in silence rather than reveal too much. Growing up, she had accepted this as just his way, but now she began to see him differently. Who was this man who had lived a life she barely knew? Guided by Sophie's enthusiasm, Clara decided to start where she'd left off, with the name Gabriel. She returned to the coffee shop, working her shift as usual, but her mind was elsewhere, running through every story her father had told her. Every detail seemed to carry new meaning now. She kept asking herself, who else might know about him? On her day off, Clara took the subway to an area where her father had once mentioned working. As she strolled through the streets, she found herself in front of an old brick building with a faded sign, the Brixton Refugee Center. For some reason, the name felt oddly familiar. She remembered her father's stories about volunteering to help people back when he was young. She had always thought he meant local charities, but now she wondered if this place had been part of his life. Clara entered the center, greeted by a receptionist who gave her a warm smile. She hesitated, unsure of how to explain why she was there, but finally said, "I'm looking for information about someone who might have volunteered here many years ago." His name was Gabriel. The receptionist paused, a curious look crossing her face. Let me see if someone who worked here back then is available to talk. Please, have a seat. Clara's heart raced as she sat down, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. Minutes later, an elderly woman with silver hair and a gentle expression appeared, introducing herself as Margaret. Margaret's eyes widened slightly when Clara mentioned her father's name. Gabriel? Yes, I remember him. We used to call him the Protector. He was passionate, dedicated, always the first to volunteer for difficult tasks, especially when it came to helping undocumented immigrants. He did things others would have found dangerous, but he never seemed afraid. We didn't know much about him, though. He kept his past hidden. Clara was taken aback. The Protector? This was not the father she remembered, the quiet, humble man who rarely spoke up even at family gatherings. She had always known him as a calm man, not someone who took risks. Seeing her confusion, Margaret explained further. Back then, many immigrants faced extreme challenges. Gabriel would often guide them through the legal system, sometimes even find them places to stay. He took on a lot of responsibility, even when it meant putting himself at risk. Clara couldn't help but feel a swell of pride mixed with shock. This man, her father, had been a champion for people in need, someone who had risked his safety to help others. But why had he hidden this part of his life? And why did he leave the UK so abruptly? Leaving the center, Clara's head spun with thoughts. She had learned something amazing about her father, but it also raised new questions. Back at home, she couldn't resist the urge to dig deeper. She called her mother in Brazil, hoping to find more clues. Her mother hesitated before revealing, "Your father, he had regrets about his time in the UK. Something happened that he never shared with me. He only told me it was a painful memory." Clara felt a chill run through her. Whatever had happened to her father had been enough for him to leave his entire life in the UK behind and never speak of it again. Determined to understand what drove him away, Clara searched through public archives, hoping to find something, anything, that might explain her father's sudden departure. After hours of sifting through articles, one headline caught her attention. Activist arrested in Brixton raid, suspected of aiding undocumented immigrants. Her heart pounded. Was her father arrested? The article didn't mention any names but described a raid on the very refugee center Margaret had mentioned. It talked about police intervention and the arrest of an unnamed activist. The man had been released without charges, but the incident had sparked protests in the area. Could this activist have been her father? Clara shared her findings with Sophie, who was as shocked as she was. "Your father, he was braver than you ever knew," Sophie whispered, amazed. But Clara didn't feel relief. If her father was indeed the one arrested, this could explain why he left, but it still didn't explain the guilt he'd carried all those years. Following Sophie's suggestion, Clara returned to the refugee center, hoping Margaret could confirm her suspicions. When Clara showed her the article, Margaret's expression turned serious. She nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, Gabriel was arrested that night. He tried to help a family escape, a mother and her child who were in danger. But something went wrong. They were caught, and Gabriel never forgave himself." The pieces started to fall into place. Her father's guilt, his secrecy. It all made sense now. He had left the UK not just because he was forced to, but because he couldn't bear the weight of what had happened. Clara sat in silence, feeling a deep sadness for the father she thought she knew, but had never truly understood. That evening, back in her small apartment, Clara sat by the window, looking out over the busy London streets. She felt closer to her father than ever, finally seeing him for who he really was, a man who cared deeply, who sacrificed his own peace to protect others. But she also felt a new determination growing within her. Her father had left the UK haunted by regrets, but maybe she could continue what he had started, find some closure for both of them. In that moment, Clara realized her journey in the UK had become more than just her own. She was living her father's dream as much as her own, and she intended to honor his legacy in a way he could never do. The mystery had only deepened, but now she knew she had a purpose. Clara's heart raced as she stared at the old, yellowed article about her father's arrest. Each line seemed to bring her closer to the man he once was, yet also deeper into the mystery he had left behind. She felt a heavy weight in her chest, the burden of secrets buried for so long. But she also felt a strange connection to him, a silent understanding of why he had hidden this part of himself. The next day, Clara returned to the refugee center, hoping to learn more about her father's past actions. Margaret welcomed her back, her warm smile turning to a serious expression when Clara shared her desire to understand what truly happened that night. Margaret looked at her thoughtfully, and then led her into a small private room filled with files and photos from the center's early years. She pulled out an old photo album and opened it to a page showing a picture of her father, young and smiling, standing beside a family, a mother and a small boy with wide, curious eyes. "Your father was helping them escape to safety," Margaret explained, her voice heavy with emotion. They were a vulnerable family who had come to the UK hoping for a new life, but without proper documentation, they faced constant threats. Your father was helping them find a safe place to hide. But someone tipped off the authorities. Clara's stomach twisted. Who would betray him? And why? As she absorbed Margaret's words, she felt a swell of anger mixed with sorrow. The man in the photo looked so hopeful, so determined to make a difference. Yet someone had taken that hope and shattered it. Margaret continued. After his arrest, your father fell into a deep silence. He felt he'd failed the people he tried to protect, especially that family. It was shortly after that night he decided to leave the UK. But he never really left behind the guilt he carried. She paused, giving Clara a sad look. I think he wanted to protect you from all this pain by not telling you. Clara's eyes lingered on the photograph, her father's face now a mix of familiarity and mystery. She clenched her fists, feeling an overwhelming need to clear his name, to prove that he wasn't a failure, but a man who had done all he could in a difficult world. Fueled by this mission, Clara dug deeper into the events surrounding that night. She combed through old archives, hoping to find any clue that could explain who betrayed her father. After days of searching, she stumbled upon an unexpected lead, a former activist named Elias, a man who had been part of the same group as her father. According to records, Elias had been questioned by the police, but was never arrested. Suspicious, Clara reached out to Margaret, who hesitated, but ultimately provided her with Elias's contact information. Clara's hands trembled as she dialed his number. The phone rang several times before a rough, older voice answered. Hello? Hello, my name is Clara. I believe you knew my father, Gabriel. Her voice cracked slightly, but she held steady. There was a pause, followed by a tense sigh. I knew him, Elias replied, his tone cautious.
Ei, recadinho rápido. Se inscreva no canal para não perder as próximas histórias com legenda dupla. E claro, deixa o seu like.
What do you want? I want to understand what happened that night, Clara said firmly, feeling a strength she hadn't known before. Someone betrayed him, and I need to know who. I need to know why my father left everything behind. Elias was silent for a long moment. Finally, he said, Meet me tomorrow at the old market on Farringdon Road. I'll tell you what I can. The line went dead, leaving Clara both anxious and determined. The next day, Clara arrived early at the market, her heart pounding. She scanned the crowd until she spotted an older man with graying hair and a weathered face. He looked around nervously as if expecting someone to be watching. When he noticed her, he gestured subtly for her to follow him to a quieter corner. They stood in tense silence before Elias finally spoke. Your father, he was a good man. He did everything he could for those people, but there were others, even in our group, who didn't trust him. They thought he was drawing too much attention, putting us all at risk. Clara's eyes narrowed. Did you betray him? Elias shook his head vigorously, his face showing a mixture of guilt and shame. No, but I didn't stop it either. There was someone else. Someone in our circle who tipped off the authorities. They were scared, too scared to let him go forward with his plans. They thought if they stopped him, they could protect themselves. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. Her father had trusted these people he had worked alongside, believing they shared his mission, and one of them had destroyed it all. "Who was it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Elias hesitated, but seeing the determination in her eyes, he finally confessed. It was Sophia. She worked closely with him but feared he would expose everyone. She thought if she alerted the authorities, it would scare him into stopping, but she didn't know they'd take it so far. She had no idea they'd arrest him. Clara's mind raced. She remembered her father mentioning a Sophia once in passing, but he'd always spoken of her with admiration, as if she had been an ally. Learning that this woman had turned against him shattered that image. Her father had been betrayed by someone he trusted deeply. Elias watched Clara's reaction. Regret etched into his face. Sophia disappeared shortly after Gabriel's arrest. She couldn't face what she had done. Your father, he forgave her, you know. He didn't want revenge. He wanted peace. Clara's hands shook as she absorbed his words. Her father had left, not because he was defeated, but because he couldn't bear the pain of betrayal. He had sought to protect others, even when he himself was vulnerable. And now, Clara was left holding the burden he had carried in silence. But Clara felt something shift within her. She realized that while her father had left the UK haunted by his past, she had the power to honor his legacy here. She could use what she had learned to continue his work in her own way. Her journey in the UK was no longer just about her own dreams. It was about finishing what her father had started and finally finding peace for both of them. Without a word, she walked away from Elias, feeling a fierce determination to carry forward her father's legacy, not out of revenge, but out of love and respect for the man he had been. Her father's fight wasn't over. It was now hers to carry on. Clara walked back through the busy London streets, the weight of her father's story settling heavily in her heart, but also igniting a new sense of purpose. She felt as if she were seeing the city through his eyes, a place of both hope and hardship, a city that had once embraced him, but had also driven him away. In that moment, she made a promise to herself. She would finish what he had started, but this time, she would do it openly and with pride. The next morning, Clara returned to the Brixton Refugee Center, her resolve steady and clear. She spoke to Margaret about volunteering, offering to assist with anything that could help the immigrants and refugees who came seeking a better life. Margaret's face lit up with gratitude. "Your father would be so proud, Clara," she said softly, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. Working at the center transformed Clara. She listened to the stories of families who had crossed oceans, leaving everything behind for the hope of a better future, just as her father had once helped so many to do. Her own struggles with adapting to a new country seemed small compared to the lives of those who had endured unimaginable hardships. Clara's work allowed her to feel a connection to her father, knowing she was making a difference in the very place he had poured his heart into years before. One afternoon, as Clara was organizing supplies, she came across an old, crumpled photograph tucked away in a drawer. It was a picture of her father, Gabriel, holding a young child, smiling brightly despite the obvious hardships he had been through. Clara felt a lump in her throat as she gently held the photo, a piece of him she hadn't expected to find. It was as if he were right there, encouraging her to keep going. Days turned into weeks, and Clara's reputation among the immigrants grew. She became known as a compassionate listener, someone who understood the fear, the uncertainty, and the hope that came with building a new life far from home. In time, the center's visitors began to open up to her, sharing their stories and struggles, trusting her as they once had trusted her father. One evening, as she was wrapping up her shift, a familiar face entered the center. A young boy and his mother, both visibly exhausted. The boy looked up at her with wide, searching eyes, and Clara felt an immediate connection. She knelt down, smiling at him, remembering her father's photo with that child from years ago. "Hello," she said gently. "Welcome. How can I help you?" The mother, her voice trembling, explained their journey and how they had been turned away time and again, fearing they had nowhere left to go. Clara listened intently, her heart breaking for them. but also swelling with determination. This is why I'm here, she thought. In helping them, she felt as though she were reaching across time, completing the work her father had begun. As Clara walked them to a safe place to stay, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She was living her father's legacy, not just in memory but through action, creating a better world for those who came to London seeking a chance, just like her father once had. Each day she felt the burden of his past lift a little more, replaced by a lightness, a sense of purpose that made every challenge worth it. One evening, she received a call from her mother in Brazil. She hadn't told her much about what she'd discovered, not wanting to reopen old wounds. But this time, Clara felt ready. She shared everything she had learned about her father's life in the UK, his secret role, his sacrifices, and his reason for leaving. Her mother listened quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "He was a good man, Clara," she said, pride evident in her voice. "He always wanted you to find your own way, but I think he knew somehow that you'd find your way back to him." Hanging up the phone, Clara felt a deep sense of closure. Her father's story was no longer a painful mystery, but a legacy of love, courage, and sacrifice that she could carry forward. Months later, as Clara continued her work at the refugee center, she was asked to speak at an event celebrating the center's anniversary. She stood on stage, her father's photograph tucked in her pocket, and looked out at the audience, many of them immigrants like herself, each carrying their own hopes and fears. Taking a deep breath, she spoke about her journey, about her father's story, and about the power of helping others even when the world seemed to be against you. The crowd listened intently, and Clara felt as if her father's spirit was there with her, his presence giving her strength. "We all come here with a dream," she said, her voice steady and full of conviction. "Some of us are running from things we cannot change. Others are searching for something better. But together, we can build something new. We can be each other's strength." As she stepped down from the stage, she was met with applause. But what mattered most to her was the sense of peace in her heart. She had finally brought her father's journey full circle, healing his past through her actions in the present. And in doing so, she had found her own purpose in this foreign land. With her father's story no longer hidden, Clara felt a newfound sense of freedom. She knew her journey was just beginning, but she felt ready for whatever lay ahead. She had discovered that the struggles of the past could transform into something powerful, something that could inspire and uplift others. And with each person she helped, each life she touched, she knew she was honoring her father's memory, building a legacy that would live on. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed Clara's story, please subscribe to the channel and share it with others who might be inspired by this incredible journey of resilience and discovery. And don't go just yet. Click on the next video to dive into another powerful story of courage and transformation abroad.